Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Coffee with CrashPlan. We've got two great presenters today for what makes a great backup solution. We'll be taking questions in the chat throughout the presentation, so please throw them there, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. With that, I'm going to get out of the way and let Shane and Jason do what they do best and talk about themselves and CrashPlan. Guys, take it away.
Thanks, Riley. Yeah, we really don't like to talk about ourselves that much, but that's a great segue into introductions. So you probably should know who's speaking at you today. My name is Jason Webster. I'm one of the sales leaders here on the CrashPlan team. I've been with CrashPlan for about 5.5 years now. I've had an opportunity primarily in the sales side of the business to work not only with customers who are deploying our backup solution and help them build out their data protection strategy, but also talk with prospective buyers who are looking to either purchase backup for their first time or replace a current tool they have in place. So in providing that guidance and that expertise so that they can make the selection that fits their environment the best. So that's kind of my background, my experience here with CrashPlan. I think it's probably important to do a little fun fact, but I know Shane's probably got better fun facts than me, maybe better dad jokes, but I'm going to leave you with 2 hot tips. Being a Minnesotan for my whole life, there's 2 things that we like to talk about. So if you're ever engaged with someone from the Midwest or Minnesota specifically, you can always talk to us about the weather. And you'll find we're never happy with the weather. It's too hot, not hot enough, too cold, not cold enough, et cetera, et cetera. And we love to bask in the misery that is Minnesota professional sports and our lack of being successful in the playoffs. So if you want to get us going, those are 2 hot tips and hot topics that you can always fire away. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Shane Quintard. I am the manager of systems engineering for the CrashPlan group. I have been with CrashPlan for the last now actually 2.5 years. And I've prior to that, I was with RSA Security and have been in the networking and security industry for the last decade plus now going on, which is kind of odd to say, but that's not going to give away my age, but been around for a while. I am not based in Minnesota. That's my fun fact. I'm actually based in Massachusetts, but I do not drop my R's. So I do park the car in Harvard Yard. So that's how I roll here. According to my family, I'm actually in New York State because I'm outside the 495 belt. So if you know anything about Massachusetts, you have Boston, then you have 95, and then you have 495, and then you have New York apparently. So that's just kind of how things are. But yeah, we'll riff on some on all good things CrashPlan here and backup and recovery and hopefully everyone gets something out of this and is able to take away some good learning points and ways to better protect your data as you look at backup and recovery.
Perfect. So as Riley introduced, we're talking about what makes a good backup solution today. So I really want to think about the year 2022. Backup has changed, the way we work has changed. So it's important to kind of really level set and understand as you're looking and potentially looking at investing in a backup solution, what are some of the key requirements that you need? Just in terms of a quick agenda, we're going to quickly touch on what is backup, why is it important, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the current challenges that we have heard and seen in the market around backup, and then finally we're going to just close with what are some key considerations, what would be our recommendations as you look at potentially investing in a backup solution. So before we begin, this is Coffee with CrashPlan. So Shane, what kind of coffee are you drinking?
I am actually drinking an espresso. So I have an espresso machine. I forget which little pod it is, but it's dark green and it's incredibly strong and full of caffeine. So I usually have about 3 of these before I get my kids off to school at 8 o'clock, and I am just raring to go at like 8:01. So that's what I'm currently consuming at the moment.
Perfect. Sounds good. I'm consuming Dunkin' Donuts finest homebrew.
Hey, some donkeys. Got
Right.
some donkeys. Was that across the street from CVS? Because that's how we roll here in Massachusetts. You got your donkeys, you got your CVS, and they're usually across the street from each other.
Well, and Baskin Robbins in the so well, this is good. Let's jump into it, Shane. The important thing is, like, let's go over the simple stuff, right? What is backup? Why is it important? I don't want to read this slide, but backup is pretty simple if you look at it at a high level. It's the protection of all of your data to ensure business continuity when some type of data loss event happens. Now, I think of data loss as like me spilling coffee on my laptop and frying it and having to make that painful call to the IT help desk. And then also thinking, oh, what happened to my all my stuff that I was working on? Will I be able to jump back in?
Sure.
Could be, you travel quite a bit, Shane. So maybe you have a little bit too much coffee, running late for your flight, and leave your laptop at the airport somewhere, or in our remote work worlds, maybe you leave it at a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or wherever your poison
Wherever. Yep. At kids soccer field.
There you go. You shouldn't be working at those, Shane. But,
no, I shouldn't.
and then, we think about like other more major catastrophic data loss events, and really ransomware is probably the one that we hear about most. We see most in the news, and
100%.
it's pretty incredible how sophisticated those attacks are getting. And it doesn't really matter which organization you are, how secure you think you might be. Those actors and are finding a way to get into your business and get your data. The other kind of catastrophic events to think about are, where's my data located? Is it in the floodplain? Is it, are there risks for tsunami, hurricane, right? Maybe not as often we're going to have those conversations, but it's something to consider when you think about where your data might be located. So, but at the end of the day, the thing that I want to point out is just protection of all data, not just specific data, not just data that's important to me, but I don't think is important to other people. All data that lives on that corporate endpoint is important. So,
yeah, exactly, and that's definitely the crux of why backup is important. Is that business continuity, that disaster recovery plan. I mean, any business should have a BCP and probably some kind of DR strategy as well. Data. After people, data is really going to be the next most critical thing to ensure that the business is able to survive, and that's where backup comes into play. And it's funny, you mentioned ransomware, and when I first started in my career, 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was, I was talking to a CISO, and even then, back then, it was not a conversation of if with regards to ransomware. It's a conversation of when. And that was the mindset, a decade ago, and that has only become more the case. When you look at any Verizon data breach report, you look at any of the security blogs, you talk to anybody in security, ransomware is the single biggest threat today, really, to any business, and being able to recover from that without paying the ransom is going to be critical path for any business. So having a solid backup plan to ensure that all of your business data is protected is going to be top of mind, for everybody at the board level, and filtering its way down through managers and line folks and your basic end user. So that's gonna that is probably top of mind for everybody in the security world today, in the IT today. So that's really answering the question of why it's important. And to that point, I mean, we've had numerous conversations with customers who have had either inaccurate or backup strategies that just weren't effective, and weren't able to capture data, and have moved to CrashPlan and have been very happy, right, with what CrashPlan does, how CrashPlan operates, and really just the ability to ensure that, as part of their strategy and their overall data protection strategy, they know they have a copy of their data. They know that their data is secure. They know that their data is recoverable, and they can do this, in fairly short order. And that's, that's a big win for us, but really just a big win for security in general. And we're happy to continue delivering that service to all of our customers, and help our prospects understand exactly why this is critical path for them.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think about it, and when I put like my IT help desk on, and I think about a world where backup doesn't exist, and like your phone rings and it's the CEO.
Yeah.
And they lost their data, and you have to break the news that they have to start all over. I mean,
that's not a fun conversation. Yeah.
The implication of that, not only for the CEO not being able to do their job, but you as the person that's supposed to have their back, it's a sticky situation. So
yeah, that's what an old manager of mine used to call a resume generating event, and we're gonna try and help those folks not have those. So moving on.
So some of the current challenges, and these are, I don't want to say these are just our opinion, but these are based on conversations that we've had. This is typically, what would drive somebody to seek out a backup solution, right? These are the challenges they're looking to solve for. And at a high level, we already said it, right? Backup, the concept is simple, but it's hard to do. And it's hard to do in a world that we live in now and work in now. The first point there, your workforce has changed. We've been 100% remote for, since, when was it, 2020, when this pandemic started. Shane, I don't know in your previous careers if you've been, remote in your role specifically, but it changes everything. Your user base, your employees aren't in the safe default building. They don't have potentially somebody who would look over their shoulder and be like, hey, you should probably look at your computer when you leave, or really anything. Ensure that you're following acceptable use policies, etc. So it was kind of interesting. I was actually doing a little research before this, and there was a survey that was done by the Harvard Business Review, and it was centered around, what is the appetite to go back into the office? Like 100%, get rid of remote, get rid of hybrid workforce. And they interviewed 30,000 working Americans between March 2020 and January 21st. And a third, which was the highest answer, said they never want to go back to the office. Followed below that was, 2 days, 3 days a week, which I think there's probably value in going in and collaborating and getting that human connection with your team. But I would say if you look at, any of the job boards that are out there, that's a win for a job seeker. They're looking for remote jobs. So it's important to think about that as you think about, how am I going to protect my data when I might not ever see my employee in person, or maybe it's a few times a year.
Right. And with that workforce changing, when it comes to data protection, and as you mentioned, acceptable use policies and things like that, you've got folks trying to follow some kind of potentially manual policy, or at an ad hoc, like, oh, I'm just going to throw this on this external hard drive, and now my data is protected, until they lose that hard drive. That hard drive finds its way into the trash. That hard drive is left outside at a kid's soccer field. Whatever it is that they have going on, that's something that's easily lost, and now your data potentially is out in the wild as well. So having a good backup policy that is automated and is driven through some other mechanism other than, let me just connect this USB device to my computer and now I think I'm protected, really just ensures that you do have that security blanket, that yes, your data is good to go, and you're in a better place and can restore that information if you absolutely had to. One of the other concerns I would say that we run into from time to time is that cost factor. Like, we don't want to back up data because it's going to the cloud, or because we don't have the budget for it. One of the things that I've run into, over the course of my career is, yes, storage costs were pretty outrageous, 5, 6, 7 years ago. That has all come down now, and storage costs really aren't a thing. What has risen has, and this I've seen across the board. This is not, this is true across really every vertical in the space today. Is ransomware insurance. And as insurers, the previous mindset was, well, we've got insurance. We'll just have the insurance policy cover ransomware event. We're good to go. Not going to worry about it. And we'll make do. Ransomware insurers today are looking at this and saying, okay, that's cool, but what protections do you have in place? And what are you doing to ensure that this thing isn't going to happen? And insurance premiums are actually increasing, 4, 5, 6-fold from what they were years ago, because you don't have those protections in place, and because you're not doing the right thing, and you're just relying on that insurance policy. So not collecting data due to storage limitations and costs has to be weighed against, well, what are the other mechanisms that we have in place today? And do those mechanisms cost more than actually having a good backup policy? And in most cases, we're gonna make it so that and any backup vendor really should be doing this, but we should be making it possible for every company to back up their data and do it in a way that's not going to break the bank, and ensure that, again, all of your critical data is protected based on whatever the backup policies are that are stated within the organization.
Yeah, I kind of like to look at that about cost as, like, maybe instead of looking at the cost of what does it cost to store my data, flipping it to what is the cost of my data? How much is my data worth? If I lost, a budget for the year 2021 in terms of billable hours to get people to recreate it, or maybe it's more sensitive. Maybe it's an earnings report in you're a privately held company. You don't want that to run in the wild. There's just a lot of things that costs are one thing, but when you look at the overall cost of your data and what that could mean to your organization, I think the cost to really implement a really solid backup solution that's automated, not requiring myself to determine what's important, what's critical data. It's just encompassing everything that I'm working on my corporate machine. I think that's a kind of a better way to look at it, and in most cases will help to kind of as some of the conversations that I've had, that conversation alone has really helped to kind of drive approval for budget to really get into a solution that's going to protect you long term. So
sure. Last two there, sync and share does not equal backup. We have a future coffee talk about this coming up. But really the key takeaway there is, with sync and share, it's all about collaboration, right? It's not a backup solution. It's all about ensuring that Jason creates a presentation, right? We've got this presentation here we're showing you today. Jason wants to share that with me because he wants me to put some input on it. He's going to use Google Drive. We are a Google Drive shop here at CrashPlan. We have CrashPlan shared folders, and we're able to effectively create data through that Google Drive service and ensure that the right information, right ideas are on paper and are being presented accurately. You're not going to do that with backup. Backup is going to protect this presentation. It's not going to it's not going to be used to collaborate. And just in case, in the event that, again, I pulled my laptop and it's gone for the day, and now we got to do this presentation, with collaboration, Jason could potentially go ahead and bring that down. I could restore it to another laptop, send it to Jason. Jason can share it out, and we're good to go, right? It's having that ability to ensure that information is protected, that data is protected, and we can go ahead and we can, we have that ability to protect and restore that information that is, again, most critical to the business. You don't have that ability with that sync and share service. That sync and share service, again, is really just used to ensure that end users can be productive across, disparate geographical regions. Jason's in Minnesota, I'm in Massachusetts. For us to get together is clearly a flight. We're not driving to the coffee shop up the street. And that again goes back to the remote hybrid environment that we're in today. Sync and Share is great for that. Backup is great for protecting all of that enterprise critical data.
I would say too, with Sync and Share, you miss out on, potential versioning. Like say you need to pick a point in time to restore to.
Yeah.
Like you can't do that with that solution. It's fantastic for collaboration. So I 100% agree with you there, but there's just some limitations that a true backup solution is going to really fill in some blind spots and fill in some gaps for you. So that last one there, catastrophic data loss events, we kind of touched on it already on the previous slide. Ransomware, natural disasters, even like political conflict. Those are kind of three things that really are a major threat to your data. They don't happen as often as, as Shane put it, porking his laptop. But they are something to think about. And, ransomware is on the rise. That's probably for the conversations that we have. That's what we're talking most to customers and prospective buyers about is how do we protect against ransomware? And if it happens, how do we get back up and running as quickly as possible? So I'm kind of a stat guy. So I posted an article on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and the headline essentially read, by the year 2031, I can't remember the source of this, so I apologize, but they're expecting that a ransomware attack will be attempted every 2 seconds. And I mean, yes, that's 9 years from now, but that's a pretty scary thought. Like that's a whole new landscape that you need to prepare for, and something that is only evolving in a way that's trickier to stop. So
right, and to that point, I actually read an article last night. I forget the source myself because it was like right before bed, and that's typically the worst time to read things like this. But the key takeaway from this article was that it was a survey of just security folks and security operations people, and we're looking at a loss of security minded individuals because ransomware is the single greatest threat, and there's just not enough protections in place. And I mean, you're talking between 30 and 40% of security analysts and security minded people today who are going to leave the industry because there's just no way to wrap your arms around this impending threat. And that's a really stark statistic that companies need to be looking at and saying, well, obviously, how do we do the work-life balance, and how do we make sure that our all of our employees are in a good mental space, but how do we also protect the data, right? And how do we protect our environment? How do we ensure that we can respond, that doesn't burn out all of our security teams and our security analysts, so that we're losing good folks that just just have no patience and no just can't handle the stress associated with with working in the security field today.
Yep. Let's kind of go to the final topic here, because I know we want to make sure that these aren't too long.
Sure.
Not that I get a little long-winded, so I apologize, Shane. That's probably more on me, my random intro of Minnesota hot takes. So this is a good opportunity, right? We've outlined some of the challenges with backup, but now's the time where we're going to just say, here's some recommendations we have, some considerations to make as you look at a potential backup solution. So, Shane, I can kind of go through the key requirements if you want to.
Go for it.
Considerations that should probably work, but ease of use. You want something that just works. I mean, that sounds corny, but you want something that you can trust and you can rely on, that without having to manage it and be in the console every day, ensuring your backups are running, that it just works, right? It's easy to deploy. It kind of goes right into that next topic or next bullet point, which is no impact to end user, right? Your backups running and collecting and archiving data and incremental changes that are happening to that data. You don't want that to stop your employees from working because a backup is running, right? And then looking at all data, right? I feel like we kind of touched on this point a number of times, and it's a critical point when you think about your backup, right? All data is important, especially if it's your company machine, right? Like, you're bound to have people that have, photos, maybe music on their machine, but again, that's your property, right? Anything that happens on that machine, any data that's on there, that's the company's property. That's typically part of the acceptable use policy. So ensuring that all of that data is there is important, especially when you think about versioning and point in time restore. If you need to reset the clock a day, can you do that? Do you have the files that you need where they stood at that point in time to restore? So Shane, I'm going to let you talk about encrypting all data because I know you love that so much.
Yeah, the other that last key requirement, right, is with the protection of all that data, we want to make sure that obviously all that data is secure. We want to make sure that, as a backup vendor, we want to make sure that, your data, regardless of where it is secure, whether it's, on the endpoint, in the cloud, in transit. That encryption component is critical path for, for any backup vendor. And, what we know as all of our conversations, at some point, the CISO or the ISO team or somebody at your organization is going to ask the question, is our data secure, and how does this vendor protect that information? And we've got tons of great public facing documentation, as well as a number of other resources that can be provided. But ultimately, right, our take on protection and encryption begins at the endpoint, and that data stays encrypted all throughout, so that nobody can read the information, nobody can see the information, and heaven forbid somebody were to actually gain access to CrashPlan's backend services, which has never happened. Nobody's going to be able to actually read any of that information anyway. So that's a key critical component for any backup and recovery solution, and is one of those things that should be at the top of everyone's list when deciding which vendor do we choose for this service. Moving into some of the other considerations, going with ease of use, continuous protection both on and off network, right? As we talked about, you've got a remote hybrid workforce today. We want to make sure that this service is available 24/7, 365, and it should be available. You should not be going through, your company's resources and your company's network to be able to get to that backup service. The cloud has made that significantly easier. We want to make sure that that continuous protection is running, and end users can't turn that service off or can't disable that service. And that's definitely a key consideration that should be looked at when you're trying to decide, between vendors when it comes to, how does this service operate, and is this always running? We've touched on ransomware already a number of times. We won't go dive back into that, but we want to make sure that the data that we are protecting can't be impacted by ransomware, right? So if God forbid you do get hit with ransomware, right, you've got that backup in the cloud that you can restore and can ensure that that data hasn't been affected by ransomware. More importantly to that, we're not reinfecting the machine with additional ransomware or that ransomware event. So going into that versioning component and ensuring that we haven't backed up a file that's going to propagate the issue, right? That's a key component as well, or a key consideration that should be looked at with regard to not only version control, but that ransomware resiliency as well. With data security and compliance, looking at that, we want to make sure that, again, whatever your data protection strategies are, whatever your disaster recovery policies are, whatever your business continuity plans are, right, you got to make sure that whatever backup service you're using can map to that. Because again, what we don't want to have is that kind of resume generating event like we talked about earlier. We don't want to have you be in a situation where, as this help desk, as the security analyst, as the IT folk, whatever your role is, right? You don't want to have that conversation with, your CEO and say, sorry, we don't have a copy of that data, and you're out of luck. There's nothing we can do for you. So whatever your policies are, you got to make sure that backup service can map to those policies to ensure that you are in compliance with, again, whatever regulations are required for your business. And then last, certainly not least, though, is that scalability question, right? How does this service scale across the organization? Is this something that you can easily deploy to 5,000 users overnight if you've had to? Again, this is something that we've looked at here at CrashPlan. A number of recent customers that have come on board with us, where we've been able to deploy up to 40,000 endpoints in 2 weeks time, right? It's not a whole lot of effort for us to do that. And we've made it very easy to ensure that scalability is a thing, but that's got to be a concern regardless of your organization size, right? With the remote or with a hybrid workforce, how do we get this service to them? How do we get it on their endpoints? And can we do this in a timeline that matches what our business expectations are? And that's got to be a consideration that everyone takes into account as well.
I think just to kind of that point, it's like, you're deploying 40,000 licenses in this example, right? You don't want to have a solution that requires you to hire subject matter experts, a whole new team of people just to manage this solution. I think typically we have maybe one admin, right, with at least the CrashPlan solution, and that's scales from mom and pop shop all the way up to our largest deployments, which are significantly higher than 40,000. So,
for sure. No, for sure. You don't want to have to have the additional overhead of more people and more teams to manage this. And that's a big component of scalability, Jason. You're absolutely right on that.
Cool. All right. Well, let's we got one last thing.
Just one last slide there. Yep, just a quick customer attestation really about the CrashPlan service. So I think we are at the end. We're at the end. So Q&A. Riley, we got anything in the chat?
Yes, we do have a few questions in the chat. So thank you all for throwing those in there. That's been super helpful. And thanks for the presentation so far. This question is coming in from Stacy. And the question was, you used the word immutable on one of the slides. What does that mean?
Immutable. So that was, I believe, we're talking about ransomware, right? So immutable means that we have a copy of that data and it's not been changed, right? So whatever the copy of that data is in its original form, you can restore that data. Now we do have, again, versioning controls as well within the CrashPlan service, which allows us to restore the most recent version of that file. But in the event that you had to go back, let's say, for example, you are you are in finance, right? And you have quarterly reports that have to be done. You've got daily reports that kind of flow into those quarterly reports. You need that original quarterly report because something doesn't make sense down the line. With CrashPlan, you can restore that original quarterly report. You can look at all of the other versions of that file that have been saved since that original file was created. And again, that's just that immutability. We're not changing any of that original data. We're changing all of those changes as you make them, and then saving versions of those copies for you, so that, again, you're not at a point where, and this kind of goes back to that file sync and share service, right? File sync and share, you're only going to have that most recent version. You're not going to have that original version you created, and that's that immutability component that we're touching on there with the CrashPlan and backup and recovery service as a whole.
Thank you, Stacy. I hope that answered your question. We have another question here from Ben, and it's I'm going to modify this a little bit. They're asking about their sync and share vendor, and then they actually mention who the sync and share vendor is encouraging them to think of that solution as a replacement for backup. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how you attack that with your product?
So I can start, and Shane, if you want to jump in and fill in anything I'm saying on the technical side of the house, that'll work. But I mean, it kind of comes back to what we were just talking about. It's versioning, and I mean, you're technically not going to restore, like whether you're using Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, or Box, right? You can't restore from those. Those files just exist in that collaborative environment, right? But the big thing is, it's the versioning thing. What if you need to go back to last week or last month or a year ago and look for something? You can't do that in those solutions. So again, like we talked about, it's great for collaboration. It really is. Like in the world we live in, I'm in it every day. I'm sharing stuff with my team so that they can continue to be productive and continue to work. But at the end of the day, it really isn't backup. And I think this is my personal opinion, so feel free to, if we had a button bar, you could buzz me, Riley or Shane. But my personal thought is just, I think the trend to look at sync and share came about when they were new, when it was first starting. And I think it was an easy way to, remove a line item from the budget without really thinking, what does this really mean? Is it really a backup? So that would be my thought, is just, if you're having that conversation internally, go with the thought, it's a collaboration tool. There's going to be limitations in terms of versioning, in terms of whether we can even restore that data. And then there's other components that come along with, data protection, and that's preservation. Do you have data preservation policies where you need to keep data for 5 years after someone offboards? Are you able to do that in those solutions? I don't know. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's 100% spot on, Jason. That's what it comes to is what is sync and share? What is it actually doing for the business? What is backup and recovery, and what is it doing for the business? And when you really start to look at it, they're solving two different issues. And one is ease of use, one is data protection.
I think we've got one more question here, so hopefully that answered the question for everyone. This one is from Owen, and it's asking about y'all mentioned those resume updating events and talking about sort of one that they had experienced in the past where a VIP's laptop hard drive had failed. And the product that they had in place spent a lot of time restoring data from that user's stuff, which how would that work is what they're asking here with something like CrashPlan.
Got it. Yeah, so it's really how is CrashPlan handling the restore functionality of the preservation component? Yeah, sure. So with CrashPlan, again, the way that it works is, once we have obviously the copy of the data in the cloud, you hit the restore button, which, I mean, literally it's a restore button in the agent. We pull the data back down in the following fashion. We're actually looking at what was the most recent data the end user was working on. So, let's say it's a whole bunch of Word docs, maybe a couple of Excel docs. I mean, that's typically what, most folks are in across any environment today. We're going to pull that information back first. The idea being, we want to ensure that your end users, going back to the productivity question, your end users are immediately productive if a restore event has to happen. So however long it takes them to restore, the most recent data they were working on, usually 15, 20 minutes is typically what we see from a benchmark standpoint. Those users can go back to being productive. And again, we're restoring the most recent, recent copies, or again, whatever version of that file they want restored to their endpoint. Once we get past that component, then we're looking at, well, what are some of those larger files that were more recently used? And again, those could be anything. It could be larger, larger Excel spreadsheets, could be larger local database docs, could be larger, whatever it is. We're then going to restore that information. Again, the concept being, maybe it wasn't used recently, but it was used within the last 30 days. So we're going to take that data, bring it back down to the endpoint. So they have that copy of data. Then we start to look at, again, smallest to largest, what data hasn't been used but still, still needs to be on the endpoint. And then we're going to restore that information later on in the restore process. So all in all, again, the goal is to ensure that your end users are immediately productive with the data that they absolutely require on their endpoint. And then we'll restore some of the stuff that, again, it's a nice to have, but we'll get to it because it wasn't critical path for that end user. When the event happened, whatever that event was, whether it's a ransomware event, they lost their machine, they as one of my colleagues recently did, spilled coffee on their laptop and the laptop started smoking. Whatever it is, right? We're going to bring that data back, and we're going to get that information back as quickly as possible so that your end users don't miss a beat from a productivity standpoint.
Well, I would certainly encourage that laptop to stop smoking. I hear that's unhealthy. But thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Join us if you don't follow us on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Please do that. Find Jason and Shane also on LinkedIn if you want to continue hearing about backup all the time. But thank you for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and we'll see you around.